What's going on in North Carolina with the fallout from HB2? I know you've been writing about that too.
Well, it's been fascinating. So I got to spend about a week down there and in my home state and spend some time. I mean, HB2 is an issue that has defined the state in a way that I have never seen in my lifetime, and one that sort of hung around the halls of that legislative building, and nobody could talk about anything else. And they came up against this really tough deadline in which the NCAA held them over a barrel and basically said, we're going to take away championships games for 6 years if you don't do something about this. And there was a lot of deal making and then deals falling apart. And again, it was sort of hard to tell what was good faith efforts and what was sort of political theater here. But eventually they managed to come up with a deal that managed to piss off everyone, which, maybe is arguably a deal and a compromise in its truest sense.
The definition of compromise.
Right.
But it was good enough to get the NCAA off their back.
Right, exactly. Even though the NCAA would say reluctantly, but of course I'm sure they had to say that. But it was enough to basically to bring them back to the table so we can see basketball championship games back there again.
But this is not the end of the road, is it? I mean, the governor wants to do more than this compromise he was able to get with this round.
Well,
correct?
It's interesting. Governor Cooper is a Southern Democrat. He's not one who's ever made social issues a predominant part of his platform or has ever necessarily been a focus of his. This was sort of thrown on his plate along with arguably the former governor McCrory. So neither of them really wanted to deal with this or talk about this. But I think that Cooper has grown to see and wants to work on non-discrimination, wants to extend LGBT protections. But he also knows that he's a weak governor. He has very little power. He's very much a figurehead. There's not a lot of executive power in North Carolina.
Well, there's even less now than there was
because
a year or so because of the bill that they passed.
Right, the supermajority even stripped him further of power. So he's dealing with a Republican supermajority legislative building, and that's really tough to deal with. And so the deal that they have come up with was basically to ban non-discrimination ordinances until 2020, which does not make the left happy because they see that as basically HB2 just being left in place until 2020. And it makes conservatives really unhappy because they feel like they're punting and eventually, this issue will come back up again. But it's interesting. The Republican Chuck McGrady, who I dealt with a lot, the state representative down there who was trying to make the deal, compared this to Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He said eventually people are going to come to their senses and realize that this is kind of crazy. LGBT people need protections. This is not an unreasonable goal. And eventually we'll come around, history will eventually come around to this. It's just not going to happen right now.
I think what I find interesting, particularly about the way this was resolved, is in the end, it was money. It was loss of money. It was loss of revenue that push this one way versus the other, rather than what's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do.
Right.
Right.
Well, and it mattered a lot.
It was not morality; it was money that decided it, which is sad, but reality.
It's the way it happens.
It mattered a lot in the election too, because North Carolina at the end of the day is still a purple state where you have to convince swing, soft, moderate R's if you want to be elected, and by wrapping it in a business issue, wrapping it in an economic issue, which it still was part of the reason why Cooper was able to win in a state that backed Trump by 5 or 6 points. So as much as it is kind of for people who support it morally, it's a little depressing, obviously. It's nonetheless a very smart strategic decision on the part of Democrats, because that is how you sell identity politics to swing voters, is by pointing out how it's an economic issue to not protect these people.